Am I
The cube designer?
so out of touch? No, it's the
Drafters.
No, we're wrong.
And the mic is registering, so we should be good.
Perfect. Well, in that case, welcome to a brand new episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy, and I am here, as always, with my co-host, Anthony Fat Stacks of Wildcard Maddox.
Oh, right, in Arena. Yeah, I've got enough wild cards, I think. I hope. We'll find out. I might finally get a chance to use them tonight.
When's the last time you played Arena?
This afternoon.
Like you like brushed up a little bit?
Yeah, I played a little bit this afternoon, but prior to that, it had been a couple months. I'll just judge by the number of things that had flashed and flickered, and booster packs that opened and gems that exploded when I opened the app. It was a lot.
When they first released Arena for Mac, I downloaded it that day and installed it and did a couple of the tutorial things. Then just immediately decided it wasn't for me. But I also logged back into my account yesterday, and just the full 3 years worth of ban announcements were all stacked up, and just nonstop little notifications. And that's just every piece of software looks like a slot machine these days, I feel like.
Yeah, and slot machines are now pieces of software, so that makes sense.
Wow.
It's all converging.
Wow, it all comes back around. We're talking about Arena for a reason, Anthony. We don't usually talk about Arena on this show, but tonight we have two special guests joining us. We have Chris and Tim from the Jank Diver gaming community who organize lots and lots of Magic drafts on Arena. Welcome, Chris and Tim.
Hello.
Happy to be here, and thank you for calling us special. It means a lot.
Yeah, we do our best. We like to make our guests feel at home and special at the same time. Everyone should feel special in their home.
I've got my plate of pizza rolls and Code Red Mountain Dew, so I'm feeling pretty special right now.
Pizza rolls? Shit, son.
I told you I was bringing hors d'oeuvres, but...
That sounds really good. You have basically invited us to join your pod tonight in this draft of one of your cubes you have in the Jank Diver gaming community. And I've known your community existed for a while. You had a podcast for a while, which is maybe coming back, I hear, which is pretty exciting. Basically, your entire community is just focused on playing Cube Draft on Arena.
Correct, yeah.
And when I say Cube Draft on Arena, I don't just mean playing the Arena cubes, which are, I don't even know, are the Arena cubes up all the time? Is it like a seasonal thing like Magic Online?
It's a seasonal thing.
Yeah,
it's a seasonal thing like Miko, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they release their own cubes on Arena. We have superior cubes that we play, but that's why we're here, just to talk about
humble
them.
Too.
Yeah, very humble.
God.
Sick brags for ourselves, But yes, the cubes that we're playing are not the cubes that a lot of people are familiar with through Arena. We have our own cubes, and we're going to talk through the process of how we actually build those cubes and play them on Arena, because it's not something that's just necessarily there through the client.
Yeah, I was going to say, so does Arena just support people having their own cubes? Can you have your cube list in Arena and then fire up a draft?
No, so you can't store your cube list in Arena. It's all done through Cube Cobra, and we use a third-party drafting utility, mtgadraft.tk. It's a really clean utility. Shout out to Senroku, who maintains it. I should probably buy them a coffee. They support not only drafting, limited sets, but you can import custom cube lists very easily from Cube Cobra with the Cube ID. So then the drafting is done there, and cubing is possible on Arena because they introduced. This was actually kind of the genesis of the community. They introduced direct challenge formats with 40 cards, and at that point, we just Tim and I both kind of immediately knew that. We could cube in the space finally.
Yeah, Chris messaged me literally the day they made that update saying, hey, we can cube digitally now. And this was midst pandemic, so it was perfect timing for it as well.
Yeah.
I've definitely used MTGA Draft a lot. And for those of you that watch the stream, that is the drafting software we use to record drafts prior to our streams. So you've seen me play it on there. I also just discovered yesterday there's a little maintain card versions checkbox when you import from Cube Cobra, which when I drafted my old border cube on there a couple weeks ago, I didn't check that box. I didn't know it existed. And everyone was like, oh, the draft client screwed up the aesthetics of the cube. But next time, I'm going to check that box. Everyone's going to love it.
Oh, you don't like the secret layer versions of every card?
Yeah, exactly. So you're basically saying you have your cube list hosted on Cube Cobra, the de facto place to host all cube lists. You use a third-party tool to draft. And Cube Cobra also has drafts, though we found them to be maybe a little bit less reliable or spotty. And it's a real big bummer when you have to restart your draft in the middle of Pack 2 or something. So you can use Cube Cobra, or you can use one of these other existing tools. And then you essentially just build the decks or import the decks into your own Arena account and then challenge somebody directly?
Correct. So that actually kind of brings me to the next important point. unlike a paper cube where you just show up and play, you own all the cards. The onus is on the drafter to have the cards that they're going to play in their deck that night. You do not have to have every card in the cube. It's our cube, and I don't even have every card in the cube just because I don't play a lot of blue. So you just need what you're going to be playing that night. But you do have to have some number of cards in your collection to be able to do this.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback off of that real quick because, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of your listeners might be more into paper cube than digital cube, and this basically means that there's
no idea.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know. But there's a wild card restriction is what he's getting at here. Arena has a system where you have to use wild cards to craft cards, but in order to get the wild cards, you have to play a little bit. So you can't just download Arena and necessarily play that day with our unrestricted cube. But we do have alternatives like our Peasant Cube, which is comprised of mostly commons and uncommons. So if you play for any, casual amount of time, you'll have the wild cards to participate in a draft like that.
So they don't even let you just log on and give them X amount of money for Y amount of wild cards and build whatever you want?
Andy, that's not how slot machines work.
That is actually exactly how slot machines work. You give them as much money as you want.
And then they only give you back a random amount of money.
Well, if you give in infinite money, you'll always get infinite money back out. That's how infinity works.
Okay.
It would be kind of hysterical if when you went to go buy wild cards in Arena, it's like $10, some number of wild cards. It's 4. It's not a bad rate, honestly, when you consider like how much cards cost in paper. One side note that I just want to observe real quick. If you're a cube player, I would assume, well, not assume, but it's probable that you enjoy limited in general, right? Maybe that's how you came into cubing. And a lot of really dedicated limited players on Arena, they don't spend their wild cards on constructed formats. So if you just have wild cards lying around because you draft on Arena a lot, A, you probably have the stock you need to play, and B, if you've drafted a ton of every set that comes out, you probably have most of the stuff already. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a good outlet for limited players to actually make use of that resource in a constructive way. And there's actually upside. We're partnered with Matcherino, so our every Sunday Cube Draft is considered a Matcherino tournament. They work with Wizards to acquire gem codes, which they then distribute among the highest performers in the draft. Yeah, so if you first place the draft tonight, we'll just send you a code for 2,000 gems, which is a substantial
will send it to
amount.
Somebody else who can use it. But that'll be fun.
All right. Yeah, no, definitely. So there's actual value to be had, and I know Magic players love their value. So just putting that out there.
Yeah, that's really cool. I had no idea that there was actual prizes for the Cube Draft that didn't come from like you guys. It comes from some third party that works at Wizards. That's really cool.
Yeah, no, it's completely free for us. I think they're trying to promote a more, open online, like competitive space. There's just there are ways, I guess, in Matcherino tournaments to sort of play on a semi-professional level.
So just so I make sure I have it straight, it sounds like if you draft limited, on any reasonable timeline, you're likely to have enough wild cards to build a deck you need when you draft your unrestricted cube. And I guess you theoretically could just log on and pay, I guess like $60 for wild cards roughly to build any deck, but that would be definitely not sustainable. Or is that just actually not possible?
No, you can certainly do that. I mean, the reality is that if you engage with Arena to any degree, I think like the highest wild card cost on average you're going to find to build a deck, it's like 5 or 6. Again, especially if you're a limited player, because most of the cards that we're playing are obviously like insane bombs in their limited format, so they're snap picks. So if you've opened a pack with one of these cards in it, you probably took it.
And if I had a reasonable collection and had to pay a few extra bucks every week to finish my deck out, I mean, that's a decent way to finish your collection in general. And also, paying a little bit of money for a draft, especially one that actually has prize support, is totally reasonable. A draft at the local game store would cost you probably $12 now. It used to be $10. Mm-hmm. It's probably 12 or 15, I imagine.
I think it's probably even more than that.
Card inflation,
it's 18 or more usually now.
Yikes. Anyway, Cube is great. But if you're going to pay that at a local game store, paying that to draft on Arena seems perfectly reasonable to me. So it seems like a really great system. I mean, transparently am never going to play a lot of Arena, but I am really excited that this is a great way, I think, to introduce people to cube drafting. And it doesn't sound that onerous to, most cube lists are already on Cube Cobra already, and then just using a tool that has a one-click import to draft, and all those tools are built pretty reliably and robustly, and then just importing your deck list seems like a really easy way to get into a format that is otherwise not made super accessible by Wizards.
Right, and I just
Totally.
wanted to, sorry, Chris, but just tack on there to that discussion that if you think that you're going to join us for a draft and maybe even join semi-regularly, let's say once a month or so, there are slots in the draft that basically never change because the cards that's occupying that slot is so good that it's unrealistic we're getting something. So if you have to craft that card one week and you come back the next week and you draft it again, you already have that card in your collection. So as you draft more through Arena, you start to build that collection, and then the the burden of having to have wild cards is lessened and lessened. And it was just recently that we got Faithless Ludin as a common on Arena. It was recently a rare, so sometimes it's a little annoying that you have to use like a rare wild card for this card that's obviously a common. But once you have it in your collection, Abundant Harvest, Sign in Blood, this nonsense that's put at rare from Wizards, once you have those cards in your collection, like, you're good to go. You draft those cards again, you have them. You don't have to worry about the wild card burden as much.
Is there any other like practical stuff about making this happen that you want people to know?
Not a practical thing, but I wanted to build on something that you mentioned earlier as far as like cubing through Arena. We have had a substantial number of incoming drafters that have they've never played a cube before. They came into the game. There was just a huge wave of expansion in the Magic player population when Arena came out. And if you came into the game through Arena, like, cubing may not be a concept that you're even familiar with, or the Arena cube is the only one that you've played. So I just wanted to mention that because I think that this space, I think that there's a lot of room to expand our hobby, which is obviously the best hobby in Magic, like, incontrovertibly, right? But this is a good way to like expose all of these new players that have come into the game to the concept of cubing, and it makes it accessible to people who might not have a local play group.
Yeah, I mean, it is great that it is still a group. It's not just sitting at the computer and playing against random strangers. You are interacting with real humans through the Discord, and that is, I mean, to me, a lot more appealing.
Definitely, and some of these people we've known for like 2 years at this point. Yeah,
it was a pretty huge thing to come off the back of COVID and the pandemic and stuff like that, and just get to know these people who are now our admins and friends. If I knew I was going to be in the city with these people, I'd be like, hey, let's hang out and do a real paper cube draft.
You've got your own little digital city that you've populated.
I mean, it's nice. You guys probably know one of the hardest things once you've built a cube is getting the people together to actually play it, and we think that digital cubing helps solve that. And I'm personally one of those people who still loves the feel of paper cards in my hand. I know Chris is a little bit like all digital all the way, but it is very
Zoomer.
Convenient.
Chris the Zoomer.
Yeah, he's he's
I'm
getting some grays.
35. I don't know if that term can be applied to me. I actually just sold my entire paper collection except my complete binder of Dominaria cards, because that, like, original Dominaria, because that set was just really special to me. I still have the original paper peasant cube that I built 3.5 years ago that was sort of the genesis for this entire thing. But otherwise, I don't have any paper cards at this point.
I do envy that a little bit. There's something very appealing about the idea of being untethered to the game and just floating in this digital space.
He says, while shuffling cards and sorting tokens.
I'm literally just surrounded by Magic cards in my basement. So yeah, not where I'm at in my life, but I do envy it to a certain degree.
Love it. Yeah, I've got paper cards all over the place around me. It's kind of embarrassing.
Something else you touched on a little bit that I think is important to just understand is that designing a cube for Arena does mean you're working with a little bit of a limited card pool, because you're only able to include the cards in your cube that you're then going to be able to craft in order to put in your decks that you're going to challenge people with. But I don't know if that's really that much of a limitation. I just did a quick Scryfall check, and it's between a quarter and a third of all Magic cards that are currently on Arena. And
I would bet a lot higher percentage of, like, for example, your cube or my cube.
Right. I mean, it is a restriction. It's something you have to bear in mind, but it's, both not a huge restriction and also pretty easy when you're searching on things like Cube Cobra, just to exclude the cards that aren't going to be available to you.
I know a lot of early cube designers are oftentimes looking for a restriction. They're like, please, it's too much. I need to narrow my scope. Give me something to latch onto.
Yeah, and just to define what the card pool we're working with is, Arena's often considered the historic card pool, which I believe is everything from Ixalan forward. Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan are the first two sets, and then every set forward
Kaladesh
is on there. Yeah, Kaladesh. Did Kaladesh come before Ixalan? It didn't it? So yeah, that was as a remaster though. But Ixalan forward, everything there is supported on the client. And then there are remasters of Shadows over Innistrad, Kaladesh, and Amonkhet blocks. And then we also get influxes of like anthologies that bring new cards into the card pool. So while we are limited, we don't have things before Shadows of Innistrad, basically. There are a touch of cards there, and it does mean that we get to work forwards and backwards at the same time. Cards are being added from new sets as well as old sets at the same time. So it's kind of cool when you get new things mixed in with old things that are classic cards that everybody knows are good. And it's like, wow, we finally get to play Snapcaster Mage and stuff like that.
Yeah,
we just got Lingering Souls this last week. So it's really cool that we get to work forwards with the new cards plus backwards with the classic cards at the same time.
You also have access to all the alchemy cards, too, which are things that most people can't play with them in paper unless you're doing some weird hacks.
I was not going to say the A word here.
Is that a bad word around here?
Well,
the community hates alchemy.
Yeah, alchemy is maybe like the most hated thing of all time. And
does anyone like it?
Not even that bird
no.
that shuffles in the full power 9 into your deck? That one seems cool.
Alchemy had such a stigma around it that they could make the coolest card and the best well-balanced design in the card, and because it's stamped with the Alchemy logo, people will automatically hate it. It is something that is unique to our Historic card pool that can't be replicated in paper. In fact, it's kind of the one thing that Historic Cube has that no other cube can have, is these digital-only Alchemy designs. For the most part,
promptly ignores it.
95% of them are either extremely broken and unbalanced or very confusing and weird. And then there's a handful, just a smattering of cards that are actually really cool. And we do play a few in our cube, but they're kind of inoffensive designs that could really exist in paper if you wanted them to. So we recently cut back on a ton of them because we just found whenever you open a pack of Magic cards, the Alchemy cards were hands down better than the cards that people were familiar with, and it was leaving a bad taste in our drafters' mouths.
Yeah, it was causing balance issues too. We got tired of it.
Yeah.
I thought it was very funny. I played a little bit of Jumpstart this afternoon just to, make sure I was familiar with the Arena client, and ended up drawing an Alchemy card, one of the specialized cards, which, I understand abstractly, but I was just
That's
like...
one of the ones that has like 6 different versions?
Yeah, it was worse.
Like...
My opponent played one, and I hovered over it. I couldn't figure out how to actually see what the card did, so I went on Scryfall, searched for it, and I was super confused because Scryfall, apparently they printed the same cards in paper that had different effects, but the same name and image.
Art and name.
It really threw me off. I was very confused.
Yeah. If you
the
want
only argument I can give for
I just killed the creature. I just moved on.
The only argument I can give for possibly defending that is I feel like maybe if they make Magic confusing and inconsistent enough, it'll just be like the early days when people couldn't Google what cards did because the internet didn't have that information on it yet. It's just they'll get there by making everything intentionally obtuse and hard to find.
To make it worse, they also have the ability to tweak these cards over time because they are digital only, and that's another thing they do in Arena sometimes is they'll take a card that people know and they will tweak what it does for a different format, but we normally play with the normal versions of cards that people are familiar with, and then Alchemy cards, if they're at the point where they're going to tweak a card so many times, we just don't include it in our cube. Like the ones that we're playing are like versions of Anticipate and Cultivate and stuff like that are just, easy to grok and don't need people to read, 6 different sides of a card.
We are about to hop into this draft then. Let's keep it snappy, but if you had to give us 2 tips about drafting this cube, which we've never drafted before, what would you say we should think about this unrestricted cube?
I think if I had to one-liner sales tag it, I would say that this is an Arena cube with a spiky design philosophy. You have to be fast. It's a fast environment. Even the slow decks need to act quickly on the board, so focus on cheap effects.
That comes naturally to me. I don't like expensive cards anyway, so I feel very good about that.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. I would say just go for raw efficiency first. Don't try to shoehorn yourself into something super archetypal because our cube is generally, built around macro archetypes, and then leave Clarion Spirit alone because I want to draft that card.
That's a bad way to get your hands on a Clarion Spirit, I have to say.
Yeah, I know.
Great. Well, this is a special 2-part episode, so we are going to go draft this cube, play a bunch of matches, and then we'll be back to discuss the results in part 2, which, for you, listener, will happen right now.
Leave Clarion Spirit alone because I want to draft that card. Leave Clarion Spirit alone because I want to draft that card.
That's a bad way to get...
Leave Clarion Spirit alone.
That's a bad way to get your hands on a Clarion Spirit.
We're back after Chapter, exactly 1 cube draft and 3 matches. The first Arena I've played in a long time, I gotta say, pretty painless. Like, I literally basically have never played Arena, pretty much.
That's a really great compliment for any kind of experience. Pretty painless.
Well, I mean, like, you would think there might be like a learning curve, but you just, if you know how to play Magic, you just click on the cards and then they get cast. It's great. Arena is very easy. So as somebody that basically does not play any digital Magic, I had 0 problems. Well, okay, I had 0 problems. I will say that it's really nice that the rules engine takes care of all the triggers for you and everything. I did discover that it doesn't read Questing Beast for you, and I kind of wish it would, because I did miss some text on Questing Beast and make a pretty bad misplay. But I think we've literally all been there.
You should email the devs and let them know that you couldn't read Questing Beast.
I could have read it. It should have announced it when it attacked. It should just like read all of its rules text when it attacks out loud in like a little voice recording.
You should put a trigger on the stack and say, I've read and agreed to the terms of this Questing Beast attack.
Terms of this Questing Beast. It's one of those like dumb GDPR pop-ups for a website, but it's the... By going to blocks, you agree that you have, in fact, read all the text on Questing Beast. Yeah, no, I flashed to my Wandering Emperor, exiled another attacking creature. I was like, I'm golden. And then it killed my Wandering Emperor and me. Well, not me. I wasn't dead, but it hit damage to me. It was bad. Read Questing Beast, kid. Read the cards is what I'm saying out there. Where do we want to start? I had a great time. I think the draft went really well. Anthony, you made it to the finals. Do you want to like talk us through your draft?
Yeah, I mean, we had the privilege of having Theo with us for a couple months last year, and I got to relive that experience and lose to Theo once again in the finals.
I also got to relive losing to Theo. I did miss it though,
It's great. Really makes you feel alive, or stupid and incompetent at playing Magic, but my deck was very cool. I sort of really leaned into, which is what I've been trying to do this a little bit more of, like not really drafting the hard way and trying to be like, oh, hey, there's a theme here. Let's not try and take the best card. Let's try and do the theme. So I saw some cool green-white...
Drafting the easy way, if you will.
Drafting the easy way. So I saw some cool green-white token payoffs, which is, something I enjoy doing, and I kind of just jumped into it and took, a whole bunch of token makers and stuff that just pumped up my whole team, and that worked out pretty well. I did get to play both Skrelv's Hive and Retrofitter Foundry and make a lot of use out of both those cards.
Very nice.
Awesome.
Tim and Chris, what did you think of this particular draft? Was this a typical draft representative of what it's like drafting the Jank Diver Unrestricted Cube?
Yeah, I would say that it was the archetype. Like we have I like to believe that the state of the cube is such that there are a lot of different ways to draft basically every color pair, depending on your individual card evaluations and kind of like pockets of synergy. So you see different stuff every week. And yeah, it was a good spread. It was a good spread this week. I got the mono black deck, which is easily my favorite deck. And I think the only reason that I didn't 3-0 with it was because I played against Theo. I play against that guy every week. I want you guys to imagine that. But yeah, no, it was a smooth draft. I really enjoyed playing with you guys, and it was a good experience. We actually had a couple of admins that haven't been around as much recently who joined us for this, which was a special experience. So yeah, I would definitely do it again.
I have some observations just on the cube. I mean, I had looked at the list a little bit. We talked about it very briefly before the draft, but transparently, I didn't like go deep and do my homework. I kind of went in a little bit blind, which is kind of how I like to draft sometimes,
It is a fun way to approach a cube.
Like, I like watching movies without having seen the trailers, and I kind of like just like opening a pack and trying to like figure it out on the fly sometimes. And I gotta say, like, I think if you hadn't told me, I probably would not have figured out that this was a cube restricted to Arena's card pool. It's just a very powerful, clean cube with a lot of iconic cards people are going to recognize. It doesn't feel like hamstrung in any way by the smaller card pool selection. The decks were really lean and focused. So I think anybody that's like looking for a maybe more like typical powerful cube experience, I think you can definitely have that without any compromise or caveats on Arena.
Yeah, I think that's basically a product of most of the most powerful cards in Magic, besides like the early Magic cards, have been printed in the last like 5 to 6 years, and we are working with a card pool that features those cards. Andy, we had the pleasure of playing in round 1, and you showcased very timely how good Adeline is, and just like completely stomped me with it. And we have cards like that in the card pool, just things that have been printed in the last couple years that are just inherently powerful. You see that a lot in things like the Moto Vintage Cube, where a lot of these new cards are pushing out like old classics and stuff like that. So the power level is fairly high all the way around. We're definitely missing cards that are before that cutoff point of Ixalan that I mentioned earlier that we would be happy to play with. But for the most part, we're not cutting corners and filling in cards that just are weak altogether to make this cube happen. We'd have a pretty robust card pool to work with, and we're at the point where we're cutting good cards for good cards.
It was a long road to get here. There was a period in the cube's history, I think I mentioned it early maybe, that I basically called the Cretaceous period now, that was just huge dorky effects, and you had infinite time to do massive things. So had you played with us 2 years ago, I don't think that would have been your take at all. But the card pool has just advanced in quality by leaps and bounds. And yeah, we're missing like a large percentage of the total cards in Magic, but when the catch-up cards that they're giving us are like Time Warp and Wormcoil Engine, like those are the cards that you're looking for, right? So it pleases me a lot, honestly, to hear you say that. But the one caveat I would add is if you are a vintage cube aficionado and you really love busted combo stuff like Sneak and Reanimator and Storm, that's not really possible in a speed maximized arena cube because there are some of the pieces, but not really. So I would say that it's a fair cube. That would be the one caveat that I would offer.
Yeah, I think some of the more weird build arounds that people might be familiar with in the vintage cube, like your oppositions and upheavals and whatnot, like, yeah, some of that stuff is not really the vibe of this cube. But I think if you're looking for, air quotes, fair Magic at the peaks of power level or very near it, this didn't feel at all like a baby cube or like a restricted cube at all. It just felt like it was, exactly what people that want to play powerful cubes are looking for a lot of the time. So that's what I want people to know listening to this is like, if they think that the card pool and arena does not allow for a like powerful cube experience, it definitely does. I felt it was a very powerful cube. My deck was really powerful, and I definitely felt like I got the same, hit of endorphins or whatever that you get from putting a bunch of powerful Magic cards in a deck and playing them on curve.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of the one card combos. You mentioned Upheaval, Opposition, those cards that decks are named after that are classic in Vintage Cube, but we do have, a lot of one card combos that are cards like Shieldred, the Apocalypse and stuff like that, which isn't currently in the cube, but you are looking at a cube that is very creature centric. A lot of the counter spells for the control decks are based on dealing with creatures. There's a lot of combat math involved. There's removal for creatures. It's very heavily creature themed because that's kind of what you've been working with for the past 10 years of Magic, right? Creatures are better than spells now for the most part. And that's kind of what the focus of the cube is unintentionally. Just very creature focused, combat focused stuff.
The other thing I want to note too is that I had way more fun playing in this draft than I've ever had playing digitally before because it is arena, and arena is not my jam, as we talked about already, but it's not like you're playing against faceless usernames, right? You're in voice chat on your Discord server, like chatting with people. You've gotten to know the people in your play group remotely, and they have, they're your friends. They have their own personalities and identities and stuff. You're playing with people, right? Like a lot of the social aspects, the gathering, as it were, in Magic is still present, even though you're playing over a digital client, which is something that I was really, I was very happy. I had more fun playing than I thought I was going to. I kind of thought it was like, all right, well, I don't love digital Magic. This will be a little bit of a slog for me, but it totally wasn't. It was just a lot of fun to play with people and, cast some spells.
Yeah, I mean, that makes such a big difference. And you even get to capture the experience of, you finish your match and you walk over to the next table and finish somebody else's. And through the way you've organized the Discord and the fact that it's really easy for someone to stream what's happening on their screen, that's just really easy to make happen.
Yeah, it was honestly like a lot of our admins at this stage are people that I would consider friends. And the fact that like we weren't all sitting at a table, but there was something social going on and we could all talk to each other and get to know each other, that was huge game for me during the pandemic. Like I spent a very large chunk of that essentially by myself. So this was just a huge social outlet for me, and it was really valuable. So I think you really can foster human connections even in these digital communities.
And for people that are out there that might want to join your community, like it's there, it's present. You can join this vibrant community of people that love Cube. They're playing every week, and you get to actually play with human beings. And I know that you're playing with human beings otherwise, but it just feels different for me, right? Like I just don't like sitting quietly in a room and, staring at an avatar and a string of characters and being like, here's my spells, I guess. And you can only communicate through the weird little like short messages, right? The little like emote messages. So that was really pleasant for me too. I was surprised at just how much it felt like paper Magic almost.
Yeah, it's actually, you get so familiar with these people who join week after week to the point where if you're sitting in a seat next to them on the draft website. Like, you actually have a good idea of what they're going to draft and what their preferences are, and that like affects the way that you end up drafting the cube, which just goes to speak to the fact that like, yeah, you can foster some relationships here in this community, and we've definitely met some wonderful people, some standout people that, you know, we wouldn't meet in person. We could only meet them in this digital space.
So yeah, I think people out there that are interested in joining, check out the show notes. There'll be a link to this community. If you're also interested in starting your own community, you have your own play group maybe that is remote these days because people have moved or life has changed or whatever. This isn't entirely viable, and I knew it was viable before we went into this, obviously, but experiencing it, I felt it. It's like, oh yeah, this is a great way to play Magic. It's a really great way to experience Cube, so people should be doing it more, I think.
Yeah, but I think especially when we're in sort of the very cube design focused circles, how to actually just get playtesting in is a difficult challenge. So I think that if people are willing to, make that small sacrifice of restricting to the arena card pool, this is just a really easy way to actually get some playtesting and some design experience. And, even if it's not necessarily the cube that you're ultimately going to have, being able to actually playtest something you build and, get that experience iterating and working on a cube, this is just a great resource.
Yeah, that's honestly been a huge boon for us as designers. I especially really like to play decks that either win or lose the game pretty quickly. So my matches tend to wrap up, and then, as Anthony mentioned earlier, you can kind of do the game store thing and hover over your buddy's shoulder and watch their match. So even if we didn't get to play a card, you might visit a room where an ongoing like grindy game is happening, and it's like, oh, there's that Lulf that we just added. How does that look? Like seeing it in play, what kind of decisions are my drafters making around it? And so you don't even necessarily have to get the card yourself to experience what it's doing in your environment.
And we've talked about it before in the show, but I think it's so much more valuable to watch a card be played than to just ask players afterwards what they think of it. Because player perceptions are different than the actual played reality, and both are important, I think, to any cube design, but it's very hard to get the played reality through the bias of a player giving you their perceptions on something. So getting to actually just watch games be played out, I think, is really cool.
Yeah, it definitely is. I'm just going to go on record and say we've played this cube about 120 times. Between me and Tim and Theo, we've probably played it, close to 300 times. So, I mean, that's really excellent. That's just very excellent feedback on the cards that you choose. The digital card pool and arena, the way the cube is maintained, because we don't actually hold any of the digital cards, like if something's broken or we want to try something some week, we can just add that card and people will test that, and we almost immediately, like within a matter of days, we'll get to see it in play and see what it does. We've been very lucky. I would venture to guess that this cube has been played a lot more times than the average cube has, even though we've only had it for 2.5 years.
At that at all. I think you can say with a high degree of confidence that it is in the top 0.1% of cubes in terms of number of times it's been played.
Yeah, I'm pretty jealous of that, actually, now that you describe it that way. I definitely have... It's a lot of work managing a paper cube, and I definitely have the experience of I go update the list on Cube Cobra, and then I gotta go, dig through my collection, find things, or order stuff that I'm missing. The idea of
you put that new card in, and no one drafts it for the first 5 drafts, and the first 5 drafts take 2.5 months, and then... You haven't learned anything, except that your players don't like Floodhound.
Yeah. I have always known that no one likes Floodhound, and it's still there.
As long as you know.
Just for fun. Just for me.
Or Blues. Love to get a last pick Floodhound and Bloodline Pretender.
Perfect.
Big regular cube hours.
But yeah, just being able to actually update the list, and then that's it. You're done. And then making it so easy just to fire up another draft. That's definitely a feature of this process of drafting, for sure. So I'm a little bit curious, just we talked a little bit about this, but how does your design process for this cube work? It sounds like it is very much community driven, but what are the specific motivations and ways that you actually make changes to it?
I'll go ahead and address this here, and Chris is like the big thinker sometimes when it comes to this, but we kind of reworked the cube from scratch. Originally, it came from a desire for our community members to have something more than the peasant cube. They wanted to play with the flashy rares and stuff like that.
So you started with the peasant cube specifically because it was much easier for players to use their wild cards on, right?
Well, it grew out of my paper peasant cube that I constructed.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, there was there was an underlying philosophy when we started that we were going to cube with commons and uncommons and avoid the whole splashy rare thing that people don't like from normal retail limited sets and stuff like that. And we played the Peasant Cube for probably a year straight before there was some itching for rares and mythic rares and stuff like that. So we did a first pass at the Unrestricted Cube. It was this very slow environment where you could cast Zakama and Agent of Treacheries with Helm of the Hosts on them and stuff like that. And after iteration after iteration, we ended up in a spot we were comfortable with, and then we decided to build it back up from the ground. We basically did an entire pass at rebuilding the cube, looking back over all of the other cards, making sure macro archetypes were represented, and most importantly, making sure that there was balance across what we were doing. We didn't want any drafter to sit down at the table, end up in a certain color pair, and feel like they just didn't have competition against the other colors. So we've always tried to maintain sort of a balance by cutting the top end of colors that are doing too well and trying to bolster colors that aren't doing well enough. That's kind of the main point. It's just making sure everybody's got a viable deck at the table.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know you've done some pretty sort of data-driven processes for this, right? I know you have a bunch of cool spreadsheets that keep track of past decks and their win rate and the way things are functioning that actually inform the design decisions for this cube, right?
We were very lucky to be in the right place at the right time. There were a lot of very intelligent, very analytically skilled Magic players out there that were looking for something.
Oh, so you were surrounded by a bunch of Magic players.
Sounds like Magic players.
Yeah, fair enough. So
were some of them perhaps computer programmers?
They might have been. Yeah, they very well may have been. We even had people who never once played the cube but showed up because they heard it was a good place to test utilities they were developing for Discord. So our draft announcement bot was developed by someone who never once actually utilized it. So we just had people showing up and making things. At this point, a couple of the admins who we were really leaning on to maintain all of that tech, because frankly, I don't have the expertise to really do it. I think the cheat is kind of frozen back maybe 5 sets ago. But it got us to this point, and it informed enough of what we were looking at that I think that allowed us to get the design to a place where we had enough experience where now we know this environment so intimately that it's more instinctive. But the data, especially because we created this shortly after we even started curating cubes, it was initially extremely, extremely helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely always advocate for, or, at least suggest that more important than a data-driven approach is the qualitative approach, because really it is about player experience. And if players feel like it's balanced and things make sense and they're having fun games, that's what's really important.
And ultimately, even 300 drafts of a cube where the list changes between every 2 or 3 drafts, you're still not really talking about statistically significant data.
For sure. But I can definitely imagine early in the process just being able to back up some of that discussion with some data and just say, hey, this strategy feels a little bit weak, and I can, point to something to support that feeling.
A lot of times you can also measure something that is effectively qualitative, right? The pick rate doesn't tell you how powerful a card is, but it does tell you how players perceive that card.
Sure, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right, you alluded to this just now, just a couple moments ago, but a lot of our update process does factor in player sentiment, especially when we are playing with a consistent group of people, week in, week out. And me and Chris, he'll tell you, we come up with these ideas sometimes where we're going to put this package in the cube, we're going to put these cards in the cube, this is how it's going to be supported. And then our drafters see those cards and they just never take them, or they're not interested in that strategy, or they consider them weak and it just never gets tried out. And we have to kind of bite the bullet and realize that, hey, if our drafters aren't going to, take the bait on these things that we thought were going to work, we have to change things up. So a lot of our decision making does factor in what our drafters are actually doing week in, week out, and the feedback that they give us. A lot of early feedback informed the cards that people liked to play and didn't like to play, especially when it comes to cards that people get really salty about or don't like losing to and stuff like that. And we don't always cut stuff like that, but we do have to take in consideration for, people's feelings about the cube and individual cards.
Perhaps I'm out of touch. No, it's the drafters who are wrong.
It's the drafters' fault.
Well, also to be fair to our drafters, Theo's really good. So I'd ask Theo about things I was thinking about. He'd be polite. He wouldn't just come at me I think that this is a terrible idea. But it'd be I'm trying to make this Flying Men deck work. And I was fixated with this Flying Men deck because there was a content creator that I used to listen to a lot who had it in their cube that had a bunch of powerful cards. And I was like, okay, if it's good enough for their environment, it's good enough for ours. And we just eventually determined, like, it's not really good enough for ours. But I was just married to the idea that this, like, blue aggro deck was going to be a thing. And, like, I just couldn't make fetch happen. We did the same thing with green-black. We were just trying to find any way we could. What was that super embarrassing card from Crimson Val we put in here, Tim? Is Tap at the Window or something?
Old Rutstein.
Yeah, Old Rutstein too. So we were really trying to make certain things happen at first, and we just eventually realized, like, things got to a power level where stuff like that just could not hang. So that's mostly gone at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about sort of community building and how important it is to building a cube is actually just like getting feedback and making it for your players. So it's awesome to hear about this like really tight-knit community that has done this in a very transparent and communal way. It's really great.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't be happier about it.
Have you ever rotisserie drafted the Jank Diver Gaming
Ooh,
Unrestricted
great question.
Cube?
Yes, we have. And, shout out to you all. I think, what was it, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, you posted a spreadsheet that was kind of like a user spreadsheet for people to get into rotisserie drafting. Up until that point, we had done 2 or 3 rotisserie drafts using another sheet that we'd found online. We kind of worked the sheet that you all posted, and we got another couple rotisserie drafts in. We haven't done it in a while and really itching to do it, but it's such a commitment for certain players who really like to do it that we haven't fired one off. But yes, we have done, I want to say, in the ballpark of 6 to 7 unrestricted rotisserie drafts and 1 peasant rotisserie draft. That one was not quite as popular due to how archetypal and color pair driven that environment is. But for unrestricted, yeah, it's a very cutthroat environment for rotisserie drafting. Super fun. It's one of the most competitive ways that you can engage with a cube, and I would recommend for anyone who hasn't rotisserie drafted a cube before, you absolutely have to do it.
I have a couple more reflections on just playing Arena more or less for the first time. I think it did go a little faster than a regular paper cube draft. I gotta say, not as fast as maybe I expected. I think the whole thing, beginning to end, took us a little over 2 hours for the draft in 3 matches, which when we do it on Tuesday nights, it takes us like 3.5 hours for a draft in 3 matches. But, you still got to wait for the round to finish. I had a couple matches games that lasted like probably 90 seconds, and that was obviously very fast. But then you got to wait for everyone else's games to finish, and obviously it goes pretty long. So it is faster, but not like crazy faster. You're still looking at like probably a 2-hour commitment to do a draft and the rounds afterwards. One thing that struck me really profoundly, I think, was how different just the tempo of the game felt playing at the speed that Arena lets you play. In Paper Magic, getting to the point of the game where you have like 5 or 6 lands in play, it feels like it takes ages. It's like that's the end game. And here you can be there in a matter of like, I mean, I had in my round 3, I did a bad not mulligan. I should have mulliganed a hand that had Forest, Abundant Harvest, and would have popped off completely had I just found a Plains. And I was on the draw, in my defense. But I didn't find my Plains, and it was a matter of like a couple turns until my opponent had like 9 lands in play. And it's like, all right, well, that took 2 minutes and you have 9 lands in play, which actually made me feel differently about like decks that are aiming to go to the mid and late game, just because it felt like it was that much more accessible, which is weird because obviously it's mechanically not any more accessible, but the fact that you get there so much faster in clock time just made a big difference to how I was perceiving the games and perceived the decks.
That's a great observation. That's one that I hadn't considered, but like when I play Control in our cube, it goes longer than a typical match on Arena, but I'm so acclimated to how long a match takes on Arena that feels slow and grindy to me. But the reality is that your Control matches can wrap up really fast because there's all the fluidity of not actually having to play your lands out the first couple turns. If you have like a cantrip on 1, some 2-drop value engine you want to drop on 2, and then you're just going to progressively hold up counter magic until you hit your game turner on 4. You can progress through that very, very fast if the game is very linear. Once you get into the really complex decision making, it probably, as a percentage, doesn't shave off that much time versus paper because a lot of what's taking time is the thinking and not like the tapping and the drawing. But if 2 fast decks are playing each other, games wrap very quickly because you just don't have to manually engage with anything.
And maybe another way to say it is just that those early turns take so much less time. Like,
I
play a lot of cubes with fetch lands, and it's like, all right, well, we're going to each shuffle our deck, and then we're going to draw hands, and if you have to mulligan, you have to shuffle your whole deck again, and that's going to take you 90 seconds, 2 minutes, then you're going to draw another hand, then we're each going to crack some fetch lands, and it's like that phase of the game feels like it takes 10 times as long in paper than it does on Arena, which means that you get to like the mid game so quickly, or like the developed part of the game where you're making those decisions that are really strategically important very quickly. It just changed my perception of the game in a way that I thought was interesting, and I was just thinking that like Magic is so many different things, right? And you can look at it so many different ways, and just getting to experience it in a different context just made me think about the game differently. And I was like, this is valuable for me as a designer, even if I never play an Arena ever again, just to like feel what this game feels like when you play it in this ever so slightly different way than playing in paper, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, I mean, Arena is great, obviously. It's like it does all the rule stuff for you. It's very quick, it's fast, it's intuitive. Again, I had zero problems with the interface. I didn't make any misplays on account of not understanding how the UI worked, just on account of being bad at Magic, which is typical. That's what I do in paper too. Yeah, I think it's like imminently accessible. And that's the biggest takeaway I want anyone listening to have from this, is that this is a great option for playing Cube, either with a pre-existing community like yours, starting your own. It's so easy to do and really good delight.
Yeah, I would add one caveat. I agree. I also had no issues, and I had a little more familiarity with Arena in general, but the game interface is great.
The rest of the interface
the direct
is
challenge
awful.
interface, the settings, there's some other aspects that did slow me down a little bit. So definitely, if you're planning on doing something similar to this, be aware that there's going to be a little bit of figuring out to make sure you understand how those parts of the interface work.
Yeah, it took me like one round, though, and I feel like if I were to go back and do it a second time, it's like I would have it down. So.
For sure.
Speaking of the client, we actually, the biggest participation we've ever had was like a year and a half ago. The Arena Cube was coming out. We did a review. It was like one of the iterations of the Arena Cube where red was just clearly the best color by a lot. You know, we talked about that, but like some big blue stuff was good. Anyway, we basically did a primer for people who were planning on doing, I think there was an Arena Open that was Arena Cube.
It was the decathlon event, the first
right.
decathlon.
So we posted that review, and we ended up advertising on Magic Arena like, hey, you know, we have an environment where we can play direct challenges on Arena, and you can literally test the Arena Cube for like a week before it comes out. And we had like 27 people show up or something crazy. Like, you know, we ran 3 pods that night, or we were going to. But Direct Challenge was broken for like 6 months, so it intermittently didn't work, even though it was like a known issue. All of this stuff happened after they released on multiple platforms. Like, I think that's what screwed everything up, is they had to develop for multiple platforms simultaneously. But yeah, we had all these people show up. It was a super exciting moment for the community. And then like Direct Challenge just didn't work. It was kind of like organizing like everybody going to play paintball, and then you show up and it's like, oops, I forgot something. We're not actually playing paintball, and this is all my fault. Like, it was really awkward. But yeah, it's a lot smoother now. They just had some serious development issues at one point.
Software is hard and largely broken, but this has gotten to a place where it seems stable enough that you can do this very reliably. And yeah, I have a lot of complaints about software, and I think there's entirely too many shiny things and sparkling gems and coins and doodads when you open the interface, but you can also just play Magic, and it's free, so that was cool.
I will just kind of add that the Jank Diver Gaming community as a whole, yes, we're a cube-based community, but if you come, join the Discord hangout, we've got a lot of other things going on as well. We, like I mentioned, occasionally we'll do a rotisserie draft. There's a big influx of people who seem to like just retail limited, which is not surprising for a cube-based community, and people just love to talk about the latest retail limited set, share their draft trophies and stuff like that. I try to maintain like an achievement list that I started a couple sets ago, and it's hard to come up with those and maintain that, but people engaged with it a little more than I expected to. So I guess what I'm getting at here is, if you don't think Arena is your jam, A, come try it out, but B, there's other stuff for you in the community. You can just come hang out. Occasionally we post a fun YouTube video. We've had podcast content and stuff like that before, so I would like to just advertise this as a cool place to come hang out and talk about Magic if you don't think that you're going to be able to get into the cube and scene on Arena. And if you don't think that, I would recommend coming and just trying it out.
What's the funniest limited achievement that you came up with for Phyrexia All Will Be One? You had some ridiculous ones, but like, what was the funniest?
I stacked the achievements as like uncommon, rare, and mythic as like easy, medium, and hard. And I will say that the only one out of all of the achievements that nobody ever accomplished was resolving Caramonyx, which was the legendary rat, and revealing another rat off the ability. Nobody ever in the course of Phyrexial will be one revealed a rat to Caramonix's ETB ability, which is sad. Also, I think people dropped off of that set pretty early on, so it's not surprising.
I would love to end on just asking you all, as people that have been curating this cube and playing on Arena actively since Arena's inception, really, what's like your top 5 cards that you want to be added to the Arena card pool from Magic's history?
Ooh, this is good. They're all
This is
blue
a Chris
for me.
question. This is a Chris question.
You get to answer too, Tim.
Can I actually, instead of like in red and black and white, I can tell you specific cards. If for blue and green, do you mind if I just mention like categories of things that we need more of? Like we just eminently need more categories of. In green, we're actually getting, like, we just got Avacyn's Pilgrim, which was awesome, but for the longest time it was just Llanowar Elves, and we were playing so much 2-mana acceleration. Like, please give us birds, Noble Hierarch, whatever. Blue still needs most of its best spells. We could be here for half an hour with me listing off the things that blue needs, unfortunately, but we did just get Snapcaster, some other stuff. But top 5 cards, I would really love... Well, actually, for a long time, I would have said Monastery Mentor, which isn't really a white card, right? It's kind of like a 3-color card, depending on the construction of your cube, but it's super sweet. We just got that. We just got Bedlam Reveler. So I've actually kind of been a happy camper. We just need more cantrips. We need more 1-mana dorks, and the black wraths are so much worse than the white wraths. Like, can you please just give us Toxic Deluge already?
Tim?
Well, a lot of my answers are always peasant-based, because I'll just play with whatever rares and mythics we have, but Eternal Witness is a huge one that I would like for both cubes. We have Timeless Witness, which was that Modern Horizons like callback to it, but we don't have Eternal Witness, which I think just enables a lot of different strategies, recursive strategies, blink strategies, also can do some like infinites with Time Walk and Soul Herder and stuff like that, which you can do with Timeless Witness. And then Jiraga Tree Speaker is one that comes to mind. Chris already mentioned, the deficit of 1-mana dorks. I'll be happy for Birds of Paradise, but just give me Jiraga Tree Speaker. That's like an eminently fair 1-mana dork that I don't think would break anything on the client. And then 2 other cards that just come to mind. I mentioned them in our Discord the other day. Chris just mentioned we're lacking certain quantities of cards in certain categories, and one of those is blue cantrips. Gataxian Probe, just a free cantrip type card that can enable some of the prowess strategies and some of the spell slinger strategies. Gataxian Probe's just a nice clean card. And a Lava Dart. Lava Dart's just a sweet card.
I love Lava Dart.
Does the same exact thing.
Oh,
yeah,
Lava Dart
it's
is
awesome.
so great.
And I didn't realize how good Lava Dart was until I played, Modern Horizons? Is that when it was reprinted, I think, in Limited?
so, yeah.
Lava Dart's just a sweet card for those like Monastery Mentor spellcasting type decks. Just, I'll take 2 of the 4. If they want to give us 2 of the 4 in the next update, I'll be happy.
To that point, I do have one question about the design of the cube. The 1-mana mana dorks is where this came up for me. I drafted like a green-white deck, and definitely found that there was like a dearth of just 1-drops that I wanted to put in my deck in the cube. And so I ended up like really late. I think I took a 3-bit Inspector over at Nissa Who Shakes the World, which in hindsight is probably just wrong. I think I underestimated the degree to which Nissa's kind of just unanswerable here almost, or like a really big bomb. But I was just like, I need 1-drop so badly. I'm going to take this 3-bit Inspector. Have you considered just breaking Singleton on cards like Llanowar Elves or Opt or Consider or whatever to get you to the density of these kinds of effects you want, even if you don't get the diversity from the actual different printings of cards?
So I think that's totally reasonable. Actually, if you look at Theo's Arena Cube, like he used to have, I'm not kidding, in a 360 card cube, or I think he does 384, so the packs are 16 cards. He literally had 8 copies of Opt in there because it was the only cantrip we had, and then Consider came out and he played 4 copies of Opt and 4 copies of Consider. And he was playing like in a 360, he was playing like something like 7 copies of Llanowar Elves. I don't think that there's anything wrong with it necessarily. If you want to do that, it just kind of drives me insane.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback there. It is one of those things that I don't even like having functional reprints of cards. Like, it bothers me when you have, like, Llanowar Elves and Elvish Mystic, but, they are different cards, so I like that. I'm just not a fan of bringing Singleton, because I think part of the appeal of building a cube is, restrictions, breeding creativity, and being restricted by the card pool you're working with, I think makes you be a little bit more creative, and you just end up with the decks that come about because of the cards that you have. But yeah, if somebody wanted to come verbatim copy our cube and sub out a couple green top end threats for a couple extra Llanowar Elves or something like that, it would make perfect sense that they're doing that to me.
Yeah, I personally, I like that when you see a card in a cube deck and someone plays it, like that's that card. Like there's no other copy of that in the draft tonight. That is the card that
Singleton
it is. You know
Singleton
what I mean?
is special. It has an emotional valence, which I think is part of the reason why Commander is so successful. It's part of the reason why people really like to adhere to Singleton for cubes. It definitely feels different when there's just one of something.
Yeah. One other thing that I wanted to mention, and like we don't need to get like deep into cube construction or whatever, but one thing that I've been really, really happy with recently, you guys did an episode on the pitfalls of, I think you called it archetype-driven design. The language that we used probably would have been like theme-driven design, but like 6 one way, half dozen the other. We abandoned theme-based design a while ago, except for themes that are kind of naturally emergent and are obviously good enough to compete on power level, like the tokens deck has demonstrated it time and time again. We're not sacrificing power in white to make tokens work. But the reason that I bring all of this up is we're at a spot now where especially Rakdos has like so many edges and like 2-card synergy combinations and stuff. I really like that with the arena card pool, we finally got into a spot where there are literally like 4 ways that you can approach building a Rakdos deck, and there's sort of sub-flavors in that. Like, does my red-black mid-range deck support this Dreadhorde Arcanist or not? If it doesn't, it's still a good deck. It's just not a Dreadhorde Arcanist deck, etc. So we're getting to the point in the arena card pool where there's just a lot of flexibility and like drafter agency, and that's really what I'm most excited about at this point in the cube's evolution.
Yeah, I think it's a great cube. Had a great time playing it. Thanks again for inviting us. It was really fun. And I hope that people listening to this that maybe were on the fence about it, or honestly, even if you previously thought I wouldn't enjoy playing cube on arena, I kind of felt that way, and I enjoyed it way more than I thought I would. So I would say if you're even remotely on the fence about it, you should definitely give it a shot, because I think you'll find that it's easier and more fun than maybe you are anticipating it being. And I hope this leads to even more people enjoying Cube, the greatest way to play Magic.
Yeah, and I feel like even though that's probably going to be the right message for most of our listeners, if you're instead someone on the other side of the fence who is an arena player who hasn't played a lot of Cube, maybe hasn't gotten this sort of social experience in the game, this is just, Cube is awesome. I think that you should listen to all the rest of this podcast to learn that Cube is awesome. But more importantly, just go try it out yourself and then experience that and jump in some of these Discords.
I think we have more listeners than we would initially expect that don't really play Cube or don't have a Cube of their own. They just like Magic.
Go play some Cube.
We talk about Magic. So yeah, this is a great way to do it. So I highly recommend it to everybody.
Just a couple of closing thoughts. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to you guys for having us on. Like, you've had 3 of my major Cube heroes, Justin Parnell, Ryan Sachs, and Sam Black, like all geniuses in the space, on this podcast in the last month, and it's a serious honor for us, to be guests here, like in this space where, those folks are operating just really, really influential Cube theorists. And Tim, I'm sure you'll want to follow up on this, but I also just wanted to shout out Get Some Game. In North Charlotte. It's the store where Tim and I met. It's where I got into Limited. It's just like a really, really fantastic place. And the Fortner family like really built a great space for playing Magic and creating community. They've been going through some stuff recently, and I just want to shout them out and just say, like, you guys have been a major part of this journey for us, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a good call out there, too, because all of this kind of started as the, LGS, people playing F&M and stuff like that. Get Some Games, kind of my home away from home, and they're great people there. So, yeah, I can't really say anything more elegantly than that, but it's a good call out for Get Some Game. They're good people.
Well, tell the nice people where they can find you. How can they find the Jank Diver Gaming community?
The Discord is the easiest place to find us. I don't know if you can possibly leave a link to that somewhere.
We'll definitely put it in the show notes. Is there a good way for them to find it if they're not going to go to the show notes?
One way to find it would be to find some of the other socials. We're on Twitter at Jank Diver Gaming. You can find some YouTube channels, which is youtube.com/Jank Diver Gaming. The podcast is not currently up, so I wouldn't look for that right now, but me and Chris have been talking about reviving it once I'm settled into my new place and fatherhood and stuff like that. But the YouTube, Twitter, and then from there you can find the links to our Discord, which is where we do most of our organization and conversation.
So join the Discord, play some Cube, and you'll be around whenever they announce the next episode of the podcast, whenever they decide to bring it back.
That's it.
Great. With that, I think that is the end of this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Thanks again to both of you for having us on to play some Cube with your group. It was a thrill. You've built a really great community there, and it was a really great time.
Yeah, thanks so much. I do want to close out by saying I explicitly said not to take Clarion Spirit, and I couldn't help but notice it ended up in one of your decks. But
Anthony doesn't respect authority. He's a
don't respect
rebel.
authority. I just read between the lines, and I like making spirits. It's great.
Yeah, it worked out for you too. But thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This show is produced by going on to Cube Cobra, importing your cube list into MTGA Draft, drafting with your friends through Discord and the voice chat, then going into Arena, exporting your deck for Arena from MTGA Draft, pasting it in, making sure you have all the wild cards, building the deck, going into the direct challenge, pasting in someone's Arena handle with the numbers following it, hitting enter, and then playing some Magic. I promise
Really
it's not as complicated as it sounds.